Morning, everybody. Wednesday morning, February 10th, and this is a meeting of the Senate Agricultural Committee. And our first item of business this morning is to have a meeting with Ryan Patch, who's the Deputy Director over in regards to water quality and ecosystems. We want to talk a lot about, in general, how things are going, Ryan, and we're very interested in the ecosystems program that you run, and because we'd like to advance that in some degree to work better for our rural communities and our, of course, our ag sector, but forestry as well. And so welcome to the committee. I think you know everybody, Ryan?
Yes, I do, Senator. Hi, everyone. Good morning.
So the floor is yours, Ryan.
Okay. Well, thank you for the record. Ryan Patch with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. It was just about this time a year ago, was able to come and share the final report, which became an interim report in the sense of the Payment for Ecosystem Services and Soil Health Working Group. COVID pandemic, as it popped up, unfortunately, understandably pushed that conversation to the back burner for the duration of 2020 with regards to some of the priorities that came out of that final report, but that doesn't mean that work didn't happen associated with the working group during that time. So today, here to have a conversation, share any information I can with regards to the plan for the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group, touch on a bit of language that's before the House Committee on Agriculture and Forestry at the moment with regards to the working group, and then can share an update on exciting program developments from both the agency, but also a number of farmer groups and land trusts and other organizations throughout the state that have been working to advance ecosystem services. So perhaps I'll just start briefly with a summary of the working group as it was formed and where it stands currently, if that makes sense, Chair Starr.
Yeah, you mentioned the House. Do you have, or does the House have some legislation that they're moving forward?
Just yesterday, presented for the housekeeping bill. It currently is not introduced. It's got a drafting number on it at the moment. It includes minor changes only to the dates for the ability for the working group to meet, as well as extends the date of the final report. The Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group was not able to meet during calendar year 2020. Owing to the pandemic and other priorities that were raised during that time. And since the group lost a year, even though there was advancement outside of the working group process, the proposal on the table is to extend the ability for the group to meet by another year, and then extend the final report by that same year. So that's the language that's before the committee at this time, House Agriculture and Forestry.
Well, as long as the word ecosystems services or something to that nature is built into their bill, and they move it forward, it opens the door so we can, add, delete, and do anything basically that we kind of want to do. So fine. Any other questions from committee members? If not, fine, Ryan, proceed.
Great, thank you. For just a bit of history setting, this is a conversation, the benefits that agriculture can bring, more than just the provision of food and fiber to the state of Vermont. It is a conversation that's been ongoing for a long time, often unquantified, unrecognized, and very often uncompensated. The working group was established by legislation in Act 83 of 2019, which convened the working group chaired by Deputy Secretary Eastman and Vermont Housing Conservation Board. Nancy Everhart was the vice chair. She has since retired, and so there will be a new vice chair from VHCB, Stacy Sabula, stepping in as the working group moves to convene the first week of March and of this year. And then, you know, in 2019, Bill, it set off a series of meetings and webinars and had meetings of the 13 members of the working group, which came out with a consensus on a vision statement and consensus on the importance of soil health in Vermont soils as the framework to look at rebuilding ecosystem services in the form of natural capital. Focusing, if you work on the soil, you build the soil health, you're going to derive a whole host of benefits depending on how you want to quantify it, whether it's water quality, whether it's soil carbon sequestration, whether it's floodplain resilience and flood resilience for downstream infrastructure. Those are the big three priorities that came out of the valuation of ecosystem services that agriculture can provide to the state, and is often unrecognized in the manner in which good agricultural management can provide those services. With that report, the legislature extended the ability for the working group to meet, renamed it, putting an emphasis instead of soil conservation practice. It became the Payment for Ecosystem Service and Soil Health Working Groups, really focusing on those performance outcomes and moving away from, the pay for practice paradigm that exists in state and federal cost share programs, really looking at the performance and the performance outcomes that can be quantified from good agricultural management. The working group is scheduled currently from Act 129 of 2020 to meet. There's a final report due January 15th of 2022. So we have calendar year 2021 to meet and put together a framework of research proposals or otherwise. Funding, unfortunately was not appropriated for moving those priorities as identified and articulated by the working group last year in 2020. And so there exists, need from the perspective of the recommendations that were made in Appendix A of the working group budget, which would require 18 months for the working group to move through. So when we reconvene in March of this year, the proposal on the table is to extend that deadline for another year so that the working group can engage in really putting forward prescriptive programmatic proposals for consideration by the legislature of how to build a program to value particular ecosystem services, quantify them, and then build a program that can compensate farmers for the currently uncompensated and ecosystem services that they provide to the state. And so it also in Act 129 of 2020, there was an expansion of membership. This was owing to, in part, recommendations from the working group to ensure there was more farmer representation on the working group, as well as to bring in some subject matter experts, economists and soil scientists, as well as also included is an ecosystem service specialist from UVM Extension, and a representative of an environmental organization with a statewide membership that has technical expertise or fundraising expertise. And this is owing in some ways to the goal of the working group to identify capital or funding from outside of the state to fund the quantification and payment and documentation of ecosystem services, perhaps in some sort of exchange, or there's been a lot of newspaper articles about other organizations or companies that are putting out ecosystem services to pay for carbon sequestration in soils, as an example, and ways to try to bring that to Vermont is why that member slot was added to membership person was added to category was added to the working group.
And
so at this time,
A&R is working with you folks, Allison and you, and how many? Go ahead, Ryan.
No, yeah, just to answer that question, yes, Agency of Natural Resources is appointed to this working group, and Marley Roop was a representative from A&R DEC that participated in the working group and will participate moving forward, as I understand it.
Yeah, Marley's good, so that's good. Any questions from any of the members yet? No? Continue, Ryan.
Sure, my pleasure. So we have a RFP out which closed, and we've selected a facilitator. We're working through contracting on it at this point in time, and so we'll be able to reconvene in March with facilitation services for this calendar year. That was a really important need articulated by the working group, and we'll be able to provide that service for the working group moving forward. As you know, as a reminder, perhaps I'll just share the working group's vision as reached by consensus. I think that's an important part of this process, is acknowledging that, you know, this has been a farmer-led and farmer-articulated, or, you know, farmers have been advocating for the development of a payment for ecosystem services program that's more holistic than, say, a narrow, you know, water quality program or, you know, pay for practice program. They really would like a holistic evaluation and accounting of the ways in which their agronomic management of crop fields can provide ecosystem benefit. And so for that, in service of that, you know, consensus is an important goal of the working group as it met and as it works to reconvene. There's not a, you know, predetermined outcome of how we're going to get there, or what we're going to value, even which modeling or measurement tool we're going to use. And that's part of the reason why the working group requested additional time, and why we're requesting additional time now, in that there's research and review of literatures that are going to be important to inform the working group as to, you know, what are scientifically valid and cost-effective and viable both measurement and modeling tools that could be deployed to quantify the specific ecosystem service benefits and the soil health of the farms, so that it can be rolled up into whatever program the working group is able to recommend or would like to put together. Funding for that payment, you know, is also another important consideration, which is why the agricultural economist has been added to the working group by Act 129 in 2020. So, sorry, that was all by way of introducing the working group's vision, which is the working group envisions a system in which farmers are hired to use their ingenuity and know-how in caring for the land to rebuild Vermont's natural capital. And as you heard from Dr. Heather Darby last week, I believe, she shared a lot of very compelling research about how good the current state of Vermont's soil health could be, or is in some cases. The full extent of that is not really known. As she articulated, a survey of, you know, all agricultural crop fields in the state, you know, hasn't been done for all of the parameters of soil health, but that is one of the questions, is, you know, how good is Vermont's, you know, soil health, and what is the capacity for farms to make additional management changes to, you know, depending on which ecosystem service, whether you want to look at soil carbon, or water quality benefits, or organic matter as a proxy for a number of those potential benefits. I think at the end of the day, the good news is, you know, when we're looking at practices or performance outcomes, there's an opportunity here to have, you know, multiple benefits from one action on a farm. You know, if you're applying cover crop, you can improve, you know, both soil carbon capture, improve water quality, and build that organic matter, which can improve the resilience of those floodplains and help hold that water on the crop field. And so when we, you know, when we think about co-benefits, you know, and the Vermont Climate Commission, and looking at climate emission, carbon or CO2 equivalent emissions from agriculture, the co-benefits there are the water quality and all the other soil health things, but very much the way in which the state of Vermont has been approaching this, with a water quality focus, Right now, we have the quantification systems in place to quantify or model the phosphorus reductions from different agronomic practices. The other co-benefits of soil carbon sequestration and those other ancillary benefits, is something that doesn't fully have a protocol in place for quantifying that. But it's certainly something that could be deployed, and we'll look to the working group to provide recommendations on how or if they want to proceed in that manner. But from my perspective, we have a very good story to tell with statewide adoption of very important conservation practices, whether it's cover crop or no-till. Many tens of thousands of acres of implementation each year, which has resulted in the ability to say, and I don't believe you've had a run through of the 2020 Clean Water Fund performance report yet as a committee?
No.
Okay, so yeah, so this is the annual report that comes out about investments made by the state of Vermont, as well as the TMDL cleanup work on the water quality side and agriculture. When you look at those figures, there's been tens of thousands of acres of implementation, and 96% of the reported phosphorus reduction has come from agriculture. What's not captured in that is, well, how much soil carbon have we sequestered with those practices? Yeah. How much other benefit? We don't have those protocols in place, but we do have a lot of information about the specific acres that was implemented, the soil type, and the information you could say you need to quantify those benefits. But at this time, it's the phosphorus protocol that we've been working to stand up, owing to the TMDL requirements and the Act 64 of 2015 directive. Farmers are doing a lot of really important work. Soil health could be at a very good level. There could and likely is capacity to make improvements or at least prevent erosion of soil carbon that's sequestered in soils. And there's been a lot of other programmatic development that's happened outside of the PES working group to kind of advance research and projects in that way that I'd be happy to provide an update on, but also can pause here for questions and discussion of the committee or whatever you prefer.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Heather Darby's presentation to the committee, and I think we all found that to be very enlightening. And the documentation of that is pretty straight up. It would be hard to argue against the findings that project produced, and I feel that that's key to moving forward with ecosystems and we for years quite a few years we've heard about healthier soils and all this, and these programs like that she or the experiment that she ran with these projects side by side, whether it's manure injection, or no-till or any of those projects, she came up with definitive answers that could be verified. And I'm wondering, has there been any measurement of soil erosion with these practices, so that for performance, has there been any measurement of that so that we can measure it and quantify it? Do you know?
Sure. And so this gets at the heart of the discussion within the working group on opportunities that exist on the measurement side, setting up direct field scale or in-stream monitoring to measure the actual departure of sediment, nutrients, or other components you'd like to look for in either the edge of crop field or in a water course if you're looking at water quality data. The ability to take those local research and data points and roll it into a model to more cost effectively estimate the potential impact of a management choice on a site-specific, crop field is what enables these quantifications to reach a scale. There's always a trade-off between the cost of measurement and developing models that is a consideration in developing a program and choosing both a measurement or a modeling tool that can provide that confidence, whether it's to a policymaker or a farmer, that what's actually happening on the ground as far as the planting of a cover crop, are we actually inducing or going to be able to quantify a particular benefit, whether that's an ecosystem service benefit related to soil carbon sequestration or water quality. I will get to the specific measurement question about edge of field soil loss, which yes, there was and is in a reduced fashion edge of field monitoring that is at a number of sites ongoing in the state of Vermont, which takes an agricultural crop field and splits it into two different watersheds and then has a few years of control and then applies a conservation practice or treatment to one side, and you can measure the total soil loss, total phosphorus loss, total nitrogen, but whatever you're measuring for. Joshua Faulkner also has he's managing that project and also has the new national NRCS SEEP project, the Conservation Effects Assessment program, which is looking at much larger watershed scale impacts from cropland management. And so that's an example of another watershed scale measurement program, which will help inform local Vermont data, which only makes models more accurate as you attempt to scale up the quantification of benefits or negative impact, depending on the conservation practice or the management that happens on a farm, to make tools and models more applicable and accurate in Vermont. And so that is an example of two edge of field or watershed monitoring programs that are happening in Vermont. As you mentioned, Heather Darby and others at UVM Extension, engage in field trials in an attempt to look at a number of different benefits. From the state side, for setting RAP compliance, we use the USDA NRCS tool called Russell 2, the Revised Universal Soil Loss Equation. It's developed by Purdue. It's the NRCS national method of quantifying, edge of field soil loss or soil loss within a field for state compliance, right? You have to have a soil loss that's no more than the value that soil can lose on an annual basis, and that's the regulatory standard, which we use the Russell 2 tool to calculate compliance with that particular standard in the area.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair?
Chris has a question, I believe. Chris,
yeah, thanks. Thank you. Ryan, as you know, I'm enthusiastic about this work, and but we have talked in the past about some pilots, and we know that sort of figuring out the metrics is a big puzzle, and then measuring the metrics is a big puzzle, and all of that is going to take probably outside expertise and money. So I'm supportive of the idea of giving you all, the working group, more time. My question, though, is there will come a time when you're going to figure out some of those parameters and come in with a budget request, because ultimately, this is going to take some investment. And I'm wondering if I guess I'm concerned that we're losing a year, or we've lost a year, and we're going to now but take up another year, because we're trying to have more perfected requests. And this current year, we have a budget surplus. And so I'm wondering if you've all considered coming forward with some of the technical assistance money ask. Even if we don't know precisely what it would be, we have to know that it's going to be a cost, and take advantage of this budget surplus, because this is actually potentially some one-time costs of measuring or pilots or what have you. Does that make sense?
Yes, Senator, it does. And I can speak to some of the work that was ongoing, and so hopefully it's not characterized as hopefully a fully lost year, because there has been work ongoing outside of the working group meeting. But to get to your question about budget requests, last year, and I will resubmit to the committee the final report, which is now the interim report, perhaps, which provided a series of 6 recommendations for funding that the working group would require, which includes those specific requests for both a review of literature as well as a research pool for advancing those specific tools needed. As we think about, and so we can, and I can share that with the committee, or I can actually bring that up on the screen if it would be helpful to look at that, if you'd like to talk about what's included in those recommendations in detail. So happy to.
Yeah. Bring it up, Ryan, so we can see it. It's fine.
Okay. Linda, do I have permissions to share my screen with the committee?
I made you co-host. You can share it, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I will get this situated on my screen. Okay, here we go. And then I will share my screen. Let's see, screen 1. Okay. Okay, so this is the more detailed estimated budget that was scheduled for 2020 to 2021. As discussed, working group didn't meet, and monies were not able to be appropriated last year owing to the pandemic. But here are some of the recommendations broken down kind of a stepwise and timeline manner, including funding for facilitation, coordination, farmer and public outreach, and then travel and honorarium for those non-paid working group members. The travel reimbursement at this time, owing to the governor's orders, we're planning on meeting remotely, at least into the near future. So that may change a bit, but certainly recognizing the fact that there are those members of the committee which are farmers or are not paid to be present at those meetings. And so that was a request from the working group for consideration by the legislature. A soil health and ecosystem services recommendation 2. This would likely be one of the first RFPs to be put out by the working group, which would be soil health and ecosystem services evidence-based review. There are details of each one of these recommendations included in the final report, but this would be looking at kind of what was discussed in the beginning here, which is scale and opportunity of soils to provide ecosystem services, and how have other programs or studies quantified some of the particular examples of ecosystem services, soil carbon, floodplain resilience, et cetera. Recommendation 3 did not have a value attached with it. This is the comparison and review of existing state, federal, university modeling and monitoring tools. The Agency of Ag, we have a grant from the Lake Champlain Basin Program where we are engaged with a contract to look at 2 of the specific, well, perhaps 3 of the specific most commonly used modeling tools for Vermont. And so this is information that we are close to finalizing and we'll be sharing with the working group when it reconvenes. It's close to a final draft, but that's been work that's been ongoing, and we had grant funding to conduct that work. And this is where the rubber hits the road specific to the conversation about monitoring and modeling, and how do we use local monitoring to build good models so that we can scale assessment and evaluation of Vermont's natural capital and the induced ecosystem services in an efficient manner. And so this, in my mind, would be another either literature review or a survey study by a qualified contractor to look at some of the models and tools that were evaluated by the working group during when they met when they met in 2019. Sorry, just zooming in there. I realized it might have been a little small. And so the group estimated that would be about a $30,000 project to do that review and bring it back to the committee. And then phase 4, or recommendation 4, is after those 3 research areas or 3 research projects are completed within the 18 to 24-month timeline. We then, the working group would then need a research pool to advance to do the monitoring. If there is a new monitoring tool, the working group recommends piloting that in the state and looking at how that data can inform either a new modeling system or existing modeling tools to effectively, quantify and bring confidence to the outputs of a particular program, saying you have made these management changes, this is the performance outcome of your fields, so that a quantifiable good or service could come out of a farmer participating in a PES program. And then another ongoing research area.
Ryan,
Yep.
Ryan, how far out is that 250, do you think? Couple of years or 1 year or 3?
Yes, we probably, the way research happens, it could be likely 1 to 2 years of research in that space to, have some results that could inform the working group. In discussing one of the conversations that was had and was voiced by the farmer members was they wanted to get this right. And so as far as using an off-the-shelf modeling tool that may be well accepted in Vermont, they had concerns that looking at holistic stacked benefits may not be fully captured in some of the current scientific approaches in the state or how it's approached in some existing programs. And so they really wanted to not go back to the drawing board. I wouldn't say that at all. They wanted to move forward in looking at some, cutting edge and newer ways to use field-specific measurement to inform models. And so they wanted to take the time to do that research to ensure a PES system or program in Vermont accurately quantifies base conditions and then what benefits have been derived by a farmer's management and could be valued and compensated.
Yep.
This is where the inclusion of an agricultural economist on the working group is important as we work towards, the academic and practical questions of pricing for the value of natural capital and ecosystem services. What is the value to the farm? What is the value to the environment? What is the value to downstream towns and road crews that don't have to deal with blown out culverts because, storms can be better held in the agricultural landscape upstream. That sort of area and research into the economic valuation is another area of research there that the working group estimated at $50,000. So those would be the sum of the recommendations that I would at this time share, from the working group. The VEST program at this time, the agency has funding for the Vermont Pay for Phosphorus program, and so I would not say that's an area that needs funding at this time. To speak from my perspective on that point.
Did you have that in your department's budget to present this year or not?
No. This research proposal came from the working group in the final report of 2020. And the work to be completed here was not included in the Agency of Agriculture's budget request.
And the amount that you actually need for this ensuing year, starting this summer, would would it run somewheres in the neighborhood of 250,000 or something like that? Or is it more?
So in so at this time, the Agency of Ag, we've secured funding within the agency's budgeting process to be able to secure facilitation services for calendar year, which one are we in, 2021. Yeah, and so any sums of money that the legislature may find and appropriate towards this project would go towards the research projects and field trials that would be recommended by the working group. Looking through the research request, you know, and the research pool for doing those field scale trials, I think that the funding you just described would adequately enable the working group to be able to put out those requests and do that research in 2021 and 2022. So I think that would certainly work.
And so committee, have you got any questions? Chris, you got any follow-ups on?
Yeah, I
on
do.
that?
I thought the governor in his budget address talked about investing in ecosystem services, or was that just the agency when you all came through? So how is it not part of the governor's budget?
I think Ryan got forgotten.
So support the governor's budget as proposed. You know, this is a working group that is chaired by Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, right? Vice Chair of VHCB. This is, you know, an important policy area of the working group. I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point, if that's all right with the committee.
Sure.
Okay. Just so I can pull up my notes here. You know, and because there's significant outside research from organizations and institute or in other organizations that are putting out RFPs for research in this space. You know, the working group as a body having money appropriated to, you know, do that work would certainly be a benefit, but reconvening and you know, putting together you know, another proposal is the process that you know, we thought would be you know, appropriate moving forward, giving some advancements in some other areas which may change some of the research priorities. But I can't speak for the working group as far as which, right, because it's a consensus-based group for which we have not met in a year. And so, you know, for those reasons, the focus of, you know, advancing ecosystem services is very much, you know, represented by, you know, grant awards to some agency projects, as well as, you know, the Vermont Land Trust and their project, the work that's ongoing at the Climate Commission, and some of the research grants that are available from the Lake Champlain Basin program, which were put out in 2020. So there's a lot of work happening in this space.
So Lake Champlain, they do give you grants to promote this or not? And how much have they given you, Ryan?
So Lake Champlain Basin program, we received funding to do research into modeling tools for the VEST program, and then they put out requests for proposals, technical proposals for research, which have not been awarded yet, but one of the priorities, and so it's unknown if, you know, a PES proposal will come out of that, but one of the research proposals from the Basin program focused on payment for ecosystem services and research into this soil health and modeling and measurement. And so if there is a proposal that comes out of that process, I think that would be, you know, an important contribution to the working group. But that was one of the priorities that was itemized in the proposal for the basin program in 2020.
So committee, am I remembering right that didn't Heather or somebody that day say that they got turned down for a proposed a proposal that they'd submitted?
Yeah, that's my
Yeah.
memory.
I remember that too, Bobby.
Yeah, and I mean, I know it's a huge chunk of change that the Lake Champlain Basin crew gets in, money from DC, but I don't recall the exact number. But I would think that they would, if they can dish out money, that this would be a pretty darn good place to do it. And so, getting back to the money, you think, Ryan, that like 250,000 or so would really make a difference to, we got to move this stuff ahead because we're losing time every year. And I know this last year has been a bummer for everybody, and we've all lost something. But hopefully, we're planning on a good year ahead. I think we as a committee what do you guys think about the funding for this process?
Well, Mr. Chair, I wanted to ask, I mean, I support it, but I thought we gave them some funding last year. And if the working group didn't work because of the pandemic, what happened to those funds?
I don't recall giving them money other than, pocket change. Ryan, what about that?
No funding was appropriated for the payment for ecosystem services working group last legislative session. And funding to date, for facilitation and convening of the working group has come from Agency of Ag and some support from VHCB for per diems. With the last time the working group met in 2019.
Okay, maybe my memory's a year back.
Yeah, I don't recall that. See, Michael's come on board. Do you have any memory of that, Michael?
So the first time that the working group was proposed, it was proposed a little bit later in the session, and in order to avoid appropriations review, there was no funding added to it, so including per diems. So the working group has never had funding for its operation.
Yeah. Brian?
Do you remember, either Michael or Ryan, what the amount would have been? Just a ballpark?
I don't think we
Did we get that
got.
far?
I don't even think we got that far because we just took the per diems out because of the timing and the I'll say the specter of the appropriations committee's review.
And you fooled around with this more than, probably not more than us, but a lot, technically more than us, Michael. If we went after like $250,000 for this, is there some way that COVID held us up this whole past year, and it's the cause of not being able to move ahead? Could you use COVID dollars to cover some of these costs that we should have had this work done, but we didn't because of COVID, and now we've got to do it in 22 or from now through 22, do you think we could stretch that to so that COVID would cover that?
So I don't think the money that was the direct appropriations to the state would qualify for the ongoing conditions for its use. However, Congress just waived the state cost share for a bunch of federal CRF programs. So that should free up some state monies that had been earmarked for that state cost share. I don't know where that money is and what amount it exists at, but
It's FEMA money that we don't have to put that 25% in.
Right.
So all those projects that we funded with FEMA money moving forward from January 26th or 7th on, we'll be able to use 100% FEMA money. And so that 25% for those projects and projected projects that we were planning will be in the kitty.
no, there's gonna be demand for that,
Oh.
you know.
Oh, yeah.
Transportation's probably said it's all theirs by now, but you're the one that knows best on how to get a hold of that, Senator Starr.
Well, if we can get a solid number to really shoot for and we can justify, it doesn't bother me to go and ask, because this is something that's gonna help our entire state for many years to come, if we can get it done and running. Corey?
I think that's exactly it, Senator Starr, and I support it, but we can sell it as this just doesn't help agriculture. It helps our ecosystem. It helps combat climate change. It's rural economic development. Very few times do we have a program that checks off all buckets of, there might be some people in legislature who aren't concerned about some of those issues, but as a whole, all of us are concerned with at least one or two of those, and I think it would have support. So I'm fully in support of it.
Well, it's also a water quality investment, and
yeah.
So I don't know if that helps pull a little bit of money along, but I think I'm confident Bobby can figure out if there's a solution.
Well, I don't know if I can figure it out, but I won't give up too easy. But so getting to that number, Ryan, 250 would take care of it. And do you think that would really make a difference for it? It wouldn't probably start unless I can get it into the mini bill that's coming. It probably wouldn't start until July 1. But if you knew it was coming, would that make a big difference in moving forward with this program so we could start getting practices in place sooner?
Senator Starr, if it's the legislature's prerogative to appropriate $250,000 to this program, it would make a significant difference in the ability to move research proposals forward as soon as the funds are available. As the working group meets on March 1st, it would significantly speed up the process by which we would need to put out and develop the research proposals that the working group would want to request. And it would certainly advance that and would certainly speed up the process of being able to get those results and move towards a full program more quickly.
Yeah. Okay, we still have 10 more minutes. Ryan, are there other questions from any of the committee members? We have anybody on institutions? You are, Corey?
Yep.
Well, hell, you can always get it in the bonding thing. This is for long term. Right?
We can try.
No.
Yeah, you'll have the first shot. We won't get the capital bill for another month or so.
But
Right.
it's good that we're kind of divided up to some degree, so we could talk about this in our respective other committees. So if it can get up and going out of approach, that when it gets to the floor, we get broad support. And would the committee would you support putting a letter together and sending, or me hand delivering it to Jane in regards to this? And
I would.
yeah, I think that would
Me
would
too.
help get it on the, what we call in approach, get it on the list. With, I think, is that something you could, 2 or 3 or 4 of the positive parts, Michael, you could throw into a letter?
I can definitely do a letter about why the working group is positive and what it does and what it's intended to do. I did not hear why Ryan's asking for the money, though. I came on late.
He's going on a trip to South America to study ecosystems. No, Ryan can get in touch with you, Michael, and give you those pointers. They're very, I thought, very solid pointers on why these projects were very important, and they're going to cost money to get the raw data to prove that if you do this, it's how to measure your performance. And I think it's key that we have this performance, a way to measure these performances, or we'll have people doing the practices and not have any way to verify what they're doing. Right?
Okay, I definitely, I
Okay, anything, right?
Yes, Senator Starr. Mr. O'Grady, I was sharing the final report from the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group, which included Appendix A, which was what the working group felt was the areas of research and funding needed to advance the priorities of the working group. So I've shared it in the chat, and I will email Linda Lehman a copy of that report and CC you.
that'd be great. Thanks.
Anything else, Ryan, that you have for us right now?
Oh, always got hundreds of slides depending on what you want to talk about. But as it relates to the working group and ecosystem services, I think we've covered a good high level overview. Look forward to reconvening with the working group in March 1st. And there's a lot to talk about and a lot of excitement and movement in this space. So I appreciate the time to share an update and chat about the working group's work.
Yeah, and just one quick question. When you were testifying in the other body, did they talk about anything about money? I can check with the chair anyhow, because sometimes if we both ask, sometimes they get money put in, and sometimes they fail and we get it in. And if we're both asking, it would might be we got 2 bites at the apple instead of just one.
Yes, the chair and the committee, while not discussing in as such detail as Senate Agriculture did, discussed the potential of making this a priority to raise, at the committee's prerogative as a priority for funding to keep the research and work moving forward. So it was discussed in that manner based on my memory from yesterday.
Very good.
But certainly we'll check with the chair.
Yeah, well, I'll speak with the chair as well. Chris?
Ryan, one of the challenges we'll face as we advocate for this is the report that we've seen, and we've talked about it with you before, but help us counter, cover crops seem great, they're building soil, but they're also leading to more pesticide use. How do you counter that assertion?
Luckily, I have Kerry Jaguar here, who just turned on his video, who can help with that answer. So I get to bunt and throw a softball over to Kerry. No, but it's definitely an area of discussion that folks have raised concern. One of the questions is, to me, how I conceptualize it is, the stepwise process of adoption, where as you move further down the spectrum of farming for soil health, tillage is reduced, the use of cover crop is increased, and in some systems, people have gotten pesticide use down to 1 quart every 8 years, as an example, from one farmer out west who was fully, on the chemical spectrum. I think there's farmers themselves have shared the changes of their use and habits related to pesticides, that they have moved down the road of no-till and cover crop and how much less they use anecdotally. But I do think these systems, as you look at building soil biology and mimicking natural systems as much as possible in the cropping system, that folks are finding that their systems are more resilient, and there's a lot of research going into termination and planting that doesn't rely on chemicals or pesticides or significantly reducing it. So it's definitely part of the spectrum of moving towards a healthy soil ecosystem. But yes, there is termination that happens with chemicals today, and Kerry may want to backfill or share a lot more information than I just did. So that's my take at the very least.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And before we get started with Kerry, didn't we hear last week when Heather and her crew were in about corn growing in grass that was knee-high or something to that effect, so that the grass was holding the soil in place and had to be using up nutrients that was put into the soil. So anyways,
Yeah, the innovative cropping like that, roller crimping, planting into standing grass. Like there's a lot of really incredible work that's happening on the ground to explore that, and I think there's a lot of possibility there.
Yeah. Anything else from any of the committee? If not, thanks a lot, Ryan, for your hour or so. It was very interesting, and I don't know if we'll get the crew any money or not, but we're going to try like heck and keep pushing forward with this, because we really need to institute these practices, to keep up with climate change and all the things that are happening. So thanks again.
My pleasure, anytime. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. So now we have, I guess, is it Kerry Jaguar? The whole screen is filled up here with somebody. Welcome, Kerry. Good to see you.
Good morning, Senator Starr. How are you?
Good. Good. Just as ever.
Excellent. I guess we can start off with answering Senator Pearson's question. about more
Yeah.
herbicide use.
Yeah,
It's not
and
necessarily more, it's just different. So the chemistries change. And, if you take a specific active ingredient and sort of graph it, you're not seeing the whole story. So as we see our cropping patterns change, move towards more conservation tillage, more cover cropping, more low till, more no till, the herbicides that we use shift. We're not using sort of the corn herbicides or broadleaf herbicides, soil sterilants. We're using more other herbicides to sort of terminate the cover crops as opposed to keeping the ground bare. So the specific active ingredients change. And if you're looking to tell one story or the other, you can pick specific active ingredients and say herbicide use is increasing, or you can pick other active ingredients and say, look, we're doing great, herbicide use is decreasing. But really what we're looking at is a shift in cropping systems. And those cropping systems are keeping nutrients out of the waters, as well as other chemistries.
so it depends on who's telling the story, what you'll get for answers.
Very much so, Senator. Yes.
That's a real good system. I've always enjoyed that. It's like talking with two lawyers and asking them the same question. You get two different stories. I was hoping that we in the ag community weren't getting that technical, so we had to come up with different stories.
Well, I
was just going to say that's why we need good, solid science behind these practices and programs, so that we can make a decision, whether we're being stiffed or not, and hopefully having experts testify, we'll understand this in a proper form. But anyhow, we want to talk about composting on farms with food residuals, and we'll get more into the fertilizers in that. And if we do a lot of composting with food residuals on farms, maybe that'll take care of our soil health, so we won't need to use so many chemicals and different ingredients to commercial ingredients like that to grow our crops. So we really need to move forward with our bill that never got done last year. Almost made it, but didn't quite. Even though we had session almost all year, we didn't get it done. So any questions for Kerry before we let him get the food residuals? No, go ahead, Kerry. And we also, Anthony?
Yeah, I don't want to go on a tangent, but I don't want to take us off on a tangent right now, but the little conversation we just had about the increased use of certain chemicals, the atrazine, glyphosate and all, there's a recent study that came out, and I would like us not to ignore that idea. I'm not saying we talk about it now, but I'd like to see us bring in some folks and talk about what they discovered in the recent analysis they did. Because I mean, even if we're exchanging one chemical for another, I'd like to know which ones we're exchanging them for. And the question is whether we're making overall progress in reducing the use of chemicals or not. And it appears that we're not. We're just exchanging one kind of chemical for another, which is not really the goal. So
Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying we should talk about it now. I just want to make sure it stays on our table.
Well, you're the one that's in charge of the composting bill. If you want to use up your hour time chewing over what chemicals go into corn or whatever and lose our chicken bill, but I think we better get back onto our chicken bill, our food residuals, and I won't let that other thing die on us or go away. We'll get back with that, as time moves on, but we really need to direct our time toward getting this bill done. We fooled
Right.
with it for 2 years or more, and its time is long overdue.
I thought we were getting pretty close.
Well, we got to third base. We never
Right.
got to home plate. So Terry, why don't we move forward with that? And I think the committee, we know what's in the food residual bill that we passed. The big issue is all the stuff that you'd like to add to that bill. I think that's the question, and I don't want to get to the point where we're putting too heavy a load on our bill that we know we have, and we know we have good support for, with all these other things and fees and new regulations and that. So I think you really need to go through that stuff more than the original bill.
Very good. Very good. And just in response to Senator Polina's tangent, Senator Polina, that discussion we're hoping to have in the House, and hopefully you'll see a bill that sort of modifies the existing Pesticide Advisory Council come to you after crossover. And so we can have those discussions the second part of the session. And I hope that works for you.
Yeah, that's the thing. We had talked about that a little bit last year, right? Last session. About the
Correct.
change in the council.
Yep, and we're hoping to have that start in the House and end up in the Senate for the second half of the session.
Okay.
Where would you like me to start, Senator Starr? I can start with sort of go over the fees that we are proposing.
Yeah, that's new to our bill, I believe.
Yep. And these changes were shared with Mike O'Grady the end of last session. We were going to try and tackle this portion of the bill in the House. As you know, you guys just made crossover getting this to the floor, and then it sort of sat in limbo, in COVID limbo, for a very long time. Linda, would it be possible for me to share a screen?
Sure.
But one thing, Carrie, that I need explained is why are we trying to tuck this new stuff onto the food residual bill versus doing a separate bill dealing with this, seeing that it's quite a lot different, I think.
In my mind, Senator, it isn't a lot different, and the compost bill does create a residuals management program at the agency, and I do want to see that program fully brought to fruition. What we're trying to accomplish is keeping contaminants off farm fields, whether that's chemical contaminants or physical contaminants. These waste streams contain a lot of other substances, whether they're the PFOA, PFOS contaminants, or plastics, or heavy metals. We want to pay attention to what is going on our ag fields as soil amendments. This would provide funding for us to do an agricultural risk assessment that isn't being done currently. We don't have enough. Go ahead.
So if communities spread their solid waste from their wastewater treatment facilities on our farmers' fields, there's no way and no money to test those fields to see how they're doing or to test that waste at the present?
So I'm going to defer to Eamon here, who's also joined us. He permits those activities, but we're not paying attention to agronomic issues. He's looking at environmental health and soil and groundwater impacts, but not impacts to farming, impacts to crops. That's the piece where we want to work together with their program.
Yeah, Emin, could you give us a quick rundown on the fees and what it does cover that you folks and what you folks do if municipalities or private people, a matter of fact, I guess that spreads their human waste or remains on land application?
Good morning. Yeah, sure. I can try. My name's Eamon Tuig. I'm here from Vermont DEC, the Emerging Contaminants and Residuals Management Program. So our program is responsible for permitting the use of biosolids in Vermont, and that's the term that the EPA in Vermont uses to describe sewage sludge that has been treated in a process to reduce pathogens. It also has to meet certain pollutant standards. Carrie alluded to heavy metals. The EPA in Vermont recognize, and the EPA conducted risk assessments on heavy metals as part of the original propagation of the federal rule back in 1993. So those are called the Part 503 rules. They're kind of famous in the biosolids world. There's a distinction between two types of biosolids that I think is important that we at least lay the groundwork for. The distinction is called either a Class A or an exceptional quality biosolid or a Class B. So there's really just two classes. And the class has nothing to do with, the only thing that has an effect on the classification is the pathogen level. So if you're a Class A or an exceptional quality biosolid, you have treated that material and tested it so that the pathogens are below a certain threshold. Versus Class B, there's also a threshold there that you have to achieve, but it's much higher. So we approach those, and every state across the nation is the same way. They approach this in a way that if you make a Class B biosolid, you haven't reached a level where you can just have unrestricted use of that material. You have to have a site-specific permit to put it anywhere on the ground, anywhere in the state, and you would get that permit from us, and it would require all sorts of site restrictions, setback distances to drinking water, surface water, etc. Those are all in the solid waste rules. They're also much more strict. Vermont's rules tend to be much more strict than the federal rule. So some states are actually just follow the federal rule verbatim, and other states have taken it much further, like Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. Most of the New England states have set their own standards that are much more, well, not much more, but are more conservative than the federal standards. So
but isn't that Maine that is in trouble with some of their land where they've been spreading waste from municipalities?
So Maine has recently come out with, there's I think currently 2 farms that they've been doing testing at, where they've had, the test results have shown fairly widespread soil contamination from, and I don't have the full data sets, but there's thousands of PFAS chemicals out there. The one that they're really looking at is called PFOS. It's one of the 2 main ones that everyone talks about. PFOA is the one and PFOS is the other. So really those are the 2 that the federal government is looking the most at. Those are the ones they have drinking water advisories for. We have included those in our standards. Most states have a standard for PFOA and PFOS. I think 44 out of the 50 states have a standard or working towards a standard for those compounds. There is widespread contamination at those farms from PFOS. My understanding, and it's not my state and not my program, is that those sites received decades of spreading. They also received contaminated biosolids. And what I mean by that is industrially contaminated. So they had some sort of user on their sewer system that was sending this chemical down the drain that was then accumulating in the sludge that was treated to biosolids and spread. So these chemicals, as you've heard, are, you know, the forever chemicals. So they stick around a long time in soil. So they're still measuring it. You know, when you talk to Maine, they call them their legacy sites because they have been getting stuff since the 1980s and stuff has been spread out there. I would just offer that, you know, the levels that they see there, and I don't want to get into like parts per billion, part per trillion, but they're, you know, 100 to 1,000 times what we have seen in Vermont so far. We tested all the soils on our sites of a similar nature. The highest value we had was a 40 part per billion. They're seeing like 400 to 1,000 part per billion, which would be a part per million. So they're quite higher. Now that's just numbers. I'm not saying anything else.
Those farms will never be farms again, is where we are.
It's made it to milk on those farms. There has been bioaccumulation documented at those farms. And Maine is working through all those sites one by one. You know, they are struggling.
And that's sort of what we would do initially with the fees we're proposing. We've already sort of designed a program, what it would look like to test milk in the state. So we would be testing milk, testing food products, not necessarily the crops or the feed, because that's a huge research endeavor, but we want to make sure that these chemicals aren't making it to the milk and your soils aren't being contaminated in such a way where it's impossible to farm that land again. Currently, Amon's program establishes numbers for drinking water and soil numbers for dermal exposure. Those dermal exposure numbers don't necessarily translate well to crop uptake or impacts on agriculture. And that's where we are hoping to work hand in hand with our programs if this goes forward. If you want to put it in a different bill, that's also fine. I just thought there's a lot of overlap here, and I definitely wanted the composters to hear the fact that we're proposing to charge a fee for soil amendments, because it would impact their business. So this all wraps into the same discussion as far as I'm concerned. But if it is too large of a conversation, you can strip the bill. It doesn't really matter to me. But that said, are you ready to look at some of the go ahead, Senator Collimore. I guess Senator Starr isn't here.
Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Chris. So, Carrie, the only thing I'm wondering about is why wouldn't we have taken this up last year when we were first putting the bill together? In other words, is this something that occurred to you late, or is the situation more timely now than it was then?
Well, Senator Collimore, strategically, this would have been an addition we would have proposed in the House. And just because the trajectory of the chicken and compost bill last year, it didn't arrive in the first week. It arrived on the scene fairly late. And these are conversations we were hoping to have in the House. And I did share these changes with Mr. O'Grady prior to crossover. And we were hoping to have the discussion in the House. You guys did a heavy lift last year getting a lot of stuff out of committee. And if you'll remember, I wasn't there from mid-February on.
Okay.
Chris?
Yeah, Carrie, we haven't had the chance to go through it with Michael. So
I don't know what your plan is, but it would help me if you just give us the basics. I mean,
Yeah.
I understand the concepts, but and then underpinning all of it for me is whether or not, if we adopt what you're proposing, it gets the support of DEC, because that's been historically where our compost challenge has, the compost bill has met a challenge.
Yep, no, I agree, and thank you, Senator Pearson. And we have been in conversations with Peter Walk, Kathy Jameson, and Eamon. And Eamon has sent some definition changes. Yesterday, I haven't had a chance to look at them myself, but Linda Bacuzzo has. They're very easy. We're fine with those changes. But as far as I can tell, we're in alignment here and support this, and would be able to support it in the House as well.
Emmett, did you want to comment on that? Are you guys working in sync from your perspective?
Our program has been working relatively closely with Linda and Carrie, because last year we tested every biosolid site that we had in Vermont, and we shared that soils data, all the data with them, because as you've heard and DEC has a groundwater standard. We're looking at soil, for that purpose, but the Agency of Ag would be interested in the crops. So that's really where they came in to advise any landowners on what they should do with those crops, or, I don't want to speak for their program, so they're going to advise the farmers on whatever they advise them on. And generally we are working together on this. I think it's really, I hate to say this, but PFAS brings people together. It's, it sucks, but I mean, we've got multiple states for the first time. There's a lot of collaboration going on amongst the states right now, because the federal government has been non-existent in terms of helping us. Hopefully that will change. But yeah, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine are really, really sort of ahead of the curve, as well as some of, maybe Michigan and some of the other states that had heavily contaminated issues with PFAS. But we're still working towards some science. The science is not developed yet. We really need soil screening values to make these determinations. Like, what is a safe level? What is not a safe level? What are we basing that on? And nobody has those numbers yet. Maine is working on them, but as far as I know, Vermont is not prepared with the science to have those values.
And that's
Well, one thing that I was taught from a young person, very young person, working a lot with my granddad and my dad on the farm, was that they would always say to me, Bobby, they aren't making any more new land, so you better take care of what we have. We've got to take care of what we have. And, that's so true. Now we're dealing with all this stuff that, it's important that we're all pushing the wagon or pulling it in the same direction and putting our best foot forward to accomplish that.
And this is supposed to be in addition or complementary to Eamon's program. The Class A biosolids can be bagged and packaged and sold as a fertilizer or a soil amendment. And when they're sold as a soil amendment, there really isn't the oversight that we would like to see. Yep, they're exceptional quality because their pathogen load is high. As a registered soil amendment, we could ask for those additional, their pathogen level is low. Thanks, Amy.
It's okay.
They've been heat treated or treated in some other form or fashion. But we, as a registered soil amendment, we could insist that the other tests be done.
Yep.
Yeah, and just not to jump in and Carrie, but we have just issued brand new solid waste rules as of October 31st, 2020. And part of those rules was an effort to sort of clamp down a little more with some institutional controls on biosolids use in Vermont. So as far as I know, we might be one of the only states that is now going to require anyone bringing biosolids into Vermont to register with our program, have an approval to bring that material in, and they will have to meet Vermont standards, or they'll actually have to meet the more conservative of either our standards or the state it was produced. So technically, Maine has some stricter standards than Vermont. So nothing from Maine can actually come to Vermont once that registry is in place. And the rule gives us the authority to do that. So our program is building that right now. The other thing that we're doing is requiring anybody making biosolids in Vermont to test for all these, all the PFAS compounds, whatever current analytical method is available to us, they will be using, and they will be doing soil testing, groundwater testing, material testing itself, crop testing, to a lesser frequency on the crops. But just so you guys know, that was DEC's, move to try to get some more control over what's going on because of PFAS, and it's really driving that.
Yeah.
And this sort of development of the program in the Agency of Ag, the fees would support us to do some of the testing to come up with some of those numbers. But what it really does is form a formal partnership between us and DEC. Right now, we discuss these issues, collaborate, design protocols, but this sort of gives us a latch point to both programs, similar to the one we have with water quality. And it provides the agricultural perspective because a lot of these are going on agricultural lands. And I'm not throwing out compost here. The premise of the sort of compost piece, we've heard from the composters that they're not happy with the level of source separation that's going on. They do see a lot of contamination. They do see a lot of plastic. Just having another voice in the matter to sort of help provide that outreach. We don't want to turn our farms into wasteland. Right. Yeah. So this is just another opportunity to have a little bit more oversight. Sorry, Senator Pearson, I have not had the opportunity to walk through the bill yet. And
well, I want you both to understand that we get comments from a few people that the state's trying to run everything, and they're trying to take right over our rights, and we have to weigh all that, but it is critical that we make sure that our land is not polluted by any type of waste or fertilizers. And so why don't you go ahead, Carrie, and run through the bill, or we're going to run out of time.
Well, what I wanted to just go over first is where the fees would be coming from.
Yeah.
And how much they would be and what they would support. And this is the proposed registration of soil amendments, biostimulants, which is a new emerging topic that we do need to be in front of, as well as the animal feed nutritional supplements, because that's a hole in our feed program that we would like to fill. So the APCO is the American Association of Pet Food Control Officials, and their documents say 37 states register soil amendments and biostimulants. The average fee per product is $76. We would propose to just register them as fertilizers, and the fertilizer fee structures are what they are, but essentially they're almost per nutrient, but a flat fee, it won't go over 105 depending on the nutrients being registered.
So go from 76 to a maximum of
Yep. 100, yeah.
101.
It's basically registering the soil amendments. We've counted about 560 products that we've currently interacted with those companies that are producing soil amendments. Some of them you've heard from, like the folks producing biochar. That would be considered a soil amendment. They do want to see an agency sort of accreditation or at least acceptance of their product as a soil amendment. So this would move them in the right direction as well. But with a registration fee of $85 a product, the revenue generated would be about $50,000. And the other piece of that is the feed supplements, and the NASC, or National Animal Supplement Council. These are products that are considered animal supplements. They do joint supplements for animals. Your glucosamine, chondroitin, they're not regulated by FDA. They're not considered feeds, but they're also heavily marketed for animals. We've got a certain number of them registered as feed because they do contain nutrients, but a lot of them slip through the cracks. There's over 1,200 animal nutritional supplements currently on the market. If we were to register them, here's the sort of outline of animal nutritional supplement products. It would add $105 a product, just like that's the same fee we charge for registering feeds. It would generate $178,000 annually. And that would get us far in testing milk, testing some of the products for PFOA or PFOS, and offer us an ability to greatly establish a program that partners and works hand in hand with Amon's program.
And how much was the $85 registration fee, the previous one? What was that going to raise totally?
50,000.
Yeah, good.
And that would be the supplements. That would be the current compost and humic acid and kelp meal products that we see. And I know newcomers to the market are these biostimulant products. Some of them make pesticide claims. They're like the kelp meal. And as we move forward with a market that legalizes cannabis, we see more and more of these biostimulants being sold into the market. They work as plant growth regulators, and they're not really pesticides. They do make plant growth regulator claims, and we would like to have regulatory oversight of those products just to ensure they are what they say they are. There's like crab shell creatine that sort of, when used on a plant, keeps the blossom small, but we want to make sure that it is what it says it is, and not like the LR that can also be used. So it would also afford us the ability to sort of have the oversight of the biostimulant products that we could run through our lab. But that's
how much is that? How much is that one, Carrie?
That's included in the $85 product, 50,000 annual.
Okay.
Yep.
So, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So, Carrie, those two fees, are they cumulative? You're
annual.
Getting 200,000 roughly by these estimates?
2.25.
Annually, yes.
But doesn't that add up to 25,000?
They are estimates, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got to watch his numbers, this guy. And then,
Yeah.
and what is the, so if I'm producing, back to the original bill, if I'm a small farmer producing compost, and our construct allows them to sell some of that, most, they have to use some of it, and they are allowed to sell some of it. They're paying you the fee for the right to sell that soil amendment,
Yes. Yep.
and they're just paying $85 a year.
Yes. Yep. And when we had Carl Hammer here the other day, he sells compost plus, various other potting soils. I think he has over a dozen products, different products. 8 of those are registered as fertilizers already. And if you've heard Mr. Hammer's testimony, it's not the annual registration fee that gets you, it's the sales tax.
So he'd have to pay 4 new fees if he's already paying on 8,
Yes.
each of those
So-
products.
So farmers have to pay sales tax on fertilizers? Or non-farmers have to pay that?
That's a discussion that you should have with the composters.
It's non-ag.
Non-ag, yep. And you're only ag if you have the sales tax exempt card.
Yep.
So if you can
Yep.
produce that, you don't have to pay sales tax. But I think conceptually it was thought that any compost was an ag product and exempt from sales tax. It turned out that wasn't true. I don't want to get into the saga, but some of the composters were handed several $100,000 tax bills.
Well, if you go to Tractor Supply or, an ex-Agway, Farmway supply place, and you buy a bag of fertilizer, you pay the sales. If I go, I pay the sales tax. But if my brother goes as a farmer, goes to Bordeaux Brothers or ag supply place, they don't pay the sales tax. So, that's understandable.
Correct.
You have to pay sales tax, don't you, Chris, when you go buy fertilizer? Or are you a farmer?
You should see my lawn, Mr. Chair. It's gorgeous.
You're a good farmer, but it's just small.
Well, you should see, when a few years ago, when you raised the tonnage tax on non-ag fertilizer, the reporting rate for non-ag fertilizer plummeted to almost zero. Whoop.
Well, a 50-pound bag of fertilizer goes a long ways on my lawn because, on anybody's lawn. So, so I don't know, Chris, do you ever hear in finance, do you ever get any complaints about that? Now, back a few years ago, when composters weren't collecting the tax, that was one thing, but I don't know how Carl, unless he sells to private individuals, why he would have to collect the sales tax, because if he's selling to Tractor Supply or Home Depot, they're the ones that have to collect they're the final seller to the public. So I should think they would have to be the ones to collect the sales tax. But isn't that the way that works, Chris?
Well, I think Carl is selling soil, right? So he collects from the customers. Maybe I'm misunderstanding you. So he collects from me when I go buy soil.
Oh, does he have a retail market then?
I think
So
so,
if he has-
Senator Polino.
If he has a retail
Yeah,
market,
he does some retail as well.
oh, well, then he'd have to collect the sales tax,
Right.
definitely. Okay, Carrie?
Yep. I'm fiddling with Zoom. At least I'm not a cat. I don't know if so basically what our proposal was largely left the language of 265 intact and didn't make any changes to what you all proposed. Maybe some dates need to be changed. This is S265 from last year. Sorry, I'm scrolling fast. The changes we proposed would be to Chapter 28, the fertilizer and lime chapter. It creates a definition of biostimulant. This is a Class A biosolids. This may be the definition that Eamon would like to see changed. I haven't looked at the email yet, but we're working with Eamon to make sure our definitions work with his program.
Yeah, that definition would come from the solid waste rules.
Yes.
And I've also generally thought we should refer to the rules because we have a whole section on Class A biosolids in there, but you haven't seen that yet, Carrie, so.
Okay, very good.
So are you guys working with Michael so that Michael knows what's going on here with these changes, or?
He's commented this is proposed. Like I said, we got close to the finish line last year when you guys were sending this over to the House. These were the proposed changes. So these are Mr. O'Grady's comments from last spring. We're hoping to introduce this in the House, but here we are. It just makes various changes to include what we were trying to do in the fertilizer law.
Yeah, why have you added lime in there? I assume, or
We did. That's the name of the chapter, Senator.
oh, okay.
Yep, this is chapter 28 of Title 6, and it's fertilizer and lime. We want to include plant amendments and biostimulants to the title.
Yeah.
So this is the current name of the chapter, chapter 28, fertilizer and lime. And it's where we're proposing to make the changes. And like I said, we've shared this with Eamon, Kathy, and Commissioner Walk. We're all in agreement that this is a good way to go, and it ties everything together neatly and allows us to partner to help establish some of those numbers. Yep, go ahead, Senator.
Carrie, I will look through the language, obviously, but are you making changes to our soil supplements and chicken, that whole section?
None at all.
Okay.
None at all.
The root of where I'm coming from on this, I guess, is a question for Eamon. Eamon, if we're adopting something pretty close to what you and Carrie have worked up, does that have you and Kathy and Commissioner Walk going into the Natural Resources Committee and expressing support for this bill?
I certainly can't speak for Kathy Jameson or Peter Walk. And I don't know if my opinion matters, but I think, we've done our best to regulate biosolids from DEC's perspective. I certainly understand Agency of Agriculture's perspective in the effort to protect farmers and any sort of potential contamination from using all these soil amendments, right? It's not just biosolids. I mean, PFAS is in food scraps. You know, PFAS is everywhere. So it's a complicated topic. It's very complicated, and sludge management in general is extremely complicated. PFAS aside, it's a big challenge facing a lot of states, including Vermont. This material has to go somewhere. It can't just be, you know, sent to the space. Like, we have very limited options in Vermont. So I have to look at this from a very large holistic perspective, and every sort of additional challenge you put in terms of recycling biosolids makes it harder. So I understand Ag's perspective. It certainly makes it more challenging for biosolids generators and producers to work, you know, to manage this material, period. And we don't have time to get into all of that today, but if you ever want to know, I'm happy to share all that with you.
And
I just have a very straightforward question. And you say you can't speak for others at the department. We need somebody to tell us very plainly, yes, if this is the approach that we support. Because if you don't do that, you know, I don't know. I'm less interested in this. This has been now the third year that we've been wrestling with the root issue here that we're trying to look at, which is just compost. And frankly, the two departments have not been on the same page, and that's why it's taken us 3 years. So we really need to know that. I mean, it's a waste of our time if you can't tell us that, or if you have
Senator Pearson, we have come together. We are presenting you with changes to a bill that we can both support.
Well, I hear you say that.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear DEC say that.
Yep. And I think Kathy Jameson would be the person who sort of can share that information with you, Kathy, or Commissioner Walk.
Well, I think it's going to be critical then that we tie up another hour or two and have Peter walk in, because as Senator Pearson has said, we've got to be in lockstep when we get the natural resources, or it'll all get thrown out, or they just won't take it up. So, you know.
Senators, I also just wanted to point out really quickly, this section right here in fertilizer statute, we charge $20 per nutrient, or $140 max. We're proposing to eliminate that per nutrient fee. It's harder for our registration folks, and just charge a flat $85 fee for fertilizer registration.
So that would simplify it for everybody.
For everybody, and that's laws, Northeast Ag, Connecticut River Ag, Bordeaux Brothers, any of our fertilizer dealers, if they've got a corn starter with NP and K and micros, it's $140, and straight urea is just $20. It sort of makes the bookkeeping harder on their end. So we just took an average, and instead of per nutrient, just a flat fee.
Yep.
So it's a win for them as well.
So section C.
And you have this, Linda. What's that? Linda has this. You're free to look at it at your own, and we can go over it more detail if you have any questions.
Yep.
And what was the question, Senator Starr?
Well, these are just word changes, like where accompanied by, with, written.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And this is the current fertilizer chapter.
Yeah.
And this is the important part of this chapter, in my opinion. it contains any deleterious or harmful ingredient in an amount sufficient to render injurious to beneficial plant life, or condemnation of a raw agricultural commodity. So if we do find some of these contaminants making it to milk at a level set by our health department, we'll be able to make sure those soil amendments no longer are used on ag land.
And this is all new language.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, we'll go back through this, with Michael eventually here.
Yep. No, I could walk you through, but I don't know what Mike's accepted or not based on what we sent him. This is exactly what we sent Mr. O'Grady, and he's sent it back with comments. We've made changes based on his comments. It's been a work in progress, but the comments are all there for you to look at as well. Yep. So I think it's worth getting a clean copy of it if you choose to include our proposal. We'll sit down and go through it then. I think in the meantime, it's worth taking testimony from other folks, maybe getting Kathy Jameson or Peter Walk also on board. But currently, you're proposing to give us a program. We just needed a place to house it, and this is a place to house that program.
Yeah. Well, are there other questions from committee members in regards to the proposal? I think the first thing we have to do is get the updates, the new updates from yesterday's meeting from you two folks, get those incorporated into the draft and get those to Michael, or have Michael add them, however that works with you folks.
We'll have our staff will incorporate Eamon's comments into the draft that we sent, and we'll resend it to both Linda and Mr. O'Grady.
Yeah, Eamon, have you talked with your higher ups about this and expressed an interest in promoting it?
We've reviewed it together with my director, Chuck Schwer, and Kathy Jameson. I have not spoken to Peter Walk, the commissioner, about this bill.
Well, Kathy would probably be the one to speak with Peter, right?
There is a chain of command.
Because we all have a boss as well. And if you encourage them with good explanations, I would hope that they would support you as sort of the expert on what Carrie's trying to do and what you're trying to do, and it would go smoother.
Understood. My understanding is that Peter's informed. I have not spoken to him directly about it.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions from committee? Anthony?
Well, I had thought that we were pretty close to agreement amongst the agencies for the bill as it stood, and it's the composting bill as we had proposed it, that we were ready to move forward with it, and that there had been agreement, nodding of the heads for the two agencies.
Well, and that part hasn't been changed at all.
Right.
So,
but I think my position right now, I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it more, but to me, we have something that is fairly, I hate to put it this way, but kind of simple, meaning it's pretty clear what we're trying to do in terms of the composting on the farms, and adding all this other language, I think, just sends it down the hall in a number of different directions and implies that it's much more complicated than it actually is.
Well, Brian?
Thank you, Bobby. I agree with Senator Polina. Before I would want to add what Carrie just showed us to the bill that we had last year, I think we need to hear from ANR. I want to hear from the feed dealers and the manufacturers and the people that all those fees are going to affect before. I am not I agree with you, Senator Polina. I like our simple chicken bill the way it was, and this may have more, a possibility of being added on to a miscellaneous bill or something coming over from the other body. I mean, that's my position right now.
Any other comments?
I guess a little follow-up to what Senator Polina was suggesting. And last year, you heard both agencies come in and raise opposition to your simple bill. Neither agency was ready to support that at all. We're presenting you with a bill that we can both support because it provides a place to house what you're asking us to do. Your bill suggests that this could be added to the RAPs. I don't believe it can because the RAPs are specifically for water quality. So I think you've got a better shot of gaining agency and administration support with the larger package, but you're free to take any route you want.
Sure. It's kind of interesting, though, that you figure there's sort of two pieces we're talking about, the composting piece and then the registration piece, just for lack of a better other way of putting it. And they may not like the composting piece, but if we add the registration piece to it, then they like the composting piece, which seems a little ironic. They either like the composting piece or they don't. I don't know why adding registration to it would all of a sudden make the composting piece more supportable. It doesn't make sense.
Like I was sort of suggesting, it allows a place for this to live inside the agency.
Sure, I understand that, but I still don't understand why, if they're okay with the composting piece, as long as it includes this other piece, they must be okay with the composting piece, I would think.
I guess sort of in response to that is you're just in one scenario, you're moving jurisdiction from one agency to the other. In the larger bill, you're essentially creating an entire program in the agency where this lives instead of just taking one jurisdiction away from one agency and handing it to another.
I think, both Brian and Anthony, I understand where you guys are coming from, certainly. And of course, if there's fees in here and increases in fees, that would have to go to finance and for sure. And is the finance committee, so far, Chris, are you taking up any bills with additional fees in them? Have you done that?
Not yet. I think our understanding is there may be something coming from the House, but not yet. But I think we could convince them. Senator Hardy's on there now, but Senator Bray is too. So this comes back to the ANR question. But I'm happy to make the case in finance if this is the direction this.
Well, I think once we hear from the other players that this is going to affect, but the main players, Commissioner Watt and our own commissioner or secretary in Ag, then we can discuss whether it's in everybody's best interest to move forward. But I understand that if we're talking about building better soils, maintaining stronger soils, and moving into the future, that it's important to make sure that our soils are checked from time to time when these different applicators are putting different products or different different matter on those fields, because we certainly don't want to be in the situation that our neighbors are in Maine. So any other questions for Iman or Carrie? If not, guys, thanks a lot for your time and your expertise in this matter, and we'll be in touch and make sure if you have any material, get it to Michael or Linda, and Linda can forward it to Michael so we can put this all together.
So
Okay.
just to be clear, would you like me to include Eamon's definitions in the draft proposal and send that to Linda and O'Grady, or would you like to stop based on Senator Cullimore and Senator Polina's desire?
Oh, no. We want to get a complete thing from both agencies, certainly. And once we see the big picture, the full package, talk with your bosses, and we'll talk with our bosses, or boss. We only have one boss. You guys got a whole bunch of them. But we'll make that determination that Anthony raised and Brian raised once we get the package before us to see what the heck we've got, and once we hear from the other folks.
Very good. Very
Okay.
good. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, hey, we've got a break, guys, for about 10 minutes.
Great.
Yeah, and then we'll have Laura Ginsburg back with us. So we'll see you back about 10 minutes or so. Yeah, thank you, Linda, and welcome, Laura. We have Laura Ginsburg with us, who's looking after. She's the Agricultural Division section chief, and we're going to talk about the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center. And Laura, I don't know if you know all. I think you've worked with at least 4 of us. We have a new member, Corey Parent from Franklin County, and so with that, we'll turn it over to you, and you can hopefully get us up to some speed in regards to all the things that you're doing and how the program's working out and moving forward. So welcome.
Thank you, Senator Starr. It's nice to be with the Senate Ag Committee this morning. So just for Senator Parent's benefit, and because I haven't seen you yet this year, I'll just reintroduce who I am and what I do. So Laura Ginsburg, I'm the section chief of the Development Division at the Agency of Agriculture. And I oversee a team of staff who work on market and business development, both state appropriated grant funds like Farm to School, the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative, and federal grant programs such as the Dairy Business Innovation Center that we'll talk about today, the marketing grants that we get. We have a grant focused on maple marketing. And so my staff work on those grants, and we also work on the consumer channels from direct to consumer all the way to international export. So really highly engaged in getting products from the farm to the consumer. And I'm also one of the ones who leads a lot of our dairy focused efforts at the agency, and have some dairy policy experience in my background, and lead, along with Diane Bothfeld and E.B. Flory, much of the agency's dairy dairy work, whether it's policy or production or marketing. So I believe Linda put the slides I'm about to show you in your folder. So you've got them for files, but I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. So you should be able to see the cover page.
Yeah.
Great. So the program is officially called the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center. And this short slide deck is a quick overview of the center, the USDA purposes behind it, and projects that we're putting money towards. I'm the lead of the center. We have 2 additional staff that are supporting the effort because it is funded at such a high dollar amount and is multiple years. So we've got myself as the lead, we have a program manager, and we've got a grants and contracts person engaged as well. So the Dairy Business Innovation Center is a USDA funded grant program, and the USDA's specific focus with this funds is the development, production, marketing, and distribution of dairy products. And they really think about it at a regional level. So we were awarded competitively in 2019. There's 2 other regional centers, the University of Wisconsin and University of Tennessee. And they both serve their regions as well. So our region is the Northeast, and their regions are the respective states that they work with. So Tennessee, for example, works with Kentucky, North Carolina. Wisconsin works with Minnesota, the Dakotas, and the states surrounding them. We all are awarded exactly the same dollar amount every time we get an allocation. And so we've all been awarded $6.5 million to date. So in 2 rounds of funding, one in 2019 and one in 2020. We have been notified that we'll be receiving a 3rd round of funds that will start this September for another $6 to $7 million. And because we were awarded and selected as one of the centers, the grant program is set that the centers will receive non-competitive funds through 2023, depending on an annual congressional appropriation. So it is something to keep in mind that the funds aren't guaranteed, but that's the purpose of the program, is to provide the longer term funding. And one of the really interesting things about this grant is that half of the funds that we receive have to go out to farmers or processors as grants to support center identified projects. And when I say the center, that means the projects that we identify. Wisconsin and Tennessee have their own grant objectives and priorities that they fund, also with at least 50% of the funds going out as grants.
Can we ask questions as we go, Laura?
Whatever works for you, Senator. I'm happy to answer them as we go or to wait until the end.
Well, I don't know. I never know what works for me, just that in the end, it usually works. But in the issue about at least 50% of funds must go to farmers or processors, I'm wondering, would that only include dairy processors, or would that include meat processors or veggie processors? Is it all agricultural processors?
This grant is 100% focused on dairy. It can be cow, sheep, goat. If we had camel dairy production, we could fund camel dairies. But it has to be dairy focused, and USDA has been very explicit in making sure that the funds adhere to that. So the Wisconsin Center wanted to fund a project on increasing the worth of bull calves by breeding cows to beef genetics, and USDA said no because it doesn't directly relate to milk production. So there are some pretty specific guidelines that we have to follow, and it does have to be focused on dairy.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. So the next part is who is involved. So broadly, we represent all the states in New England, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey, so the Northeast, which means that for the projects that we identify, which is the majority of them, they have to be either accessible or available to apply for farmers or processors in any one of those states. And you'll see I'm going to review the project. So there are some that are Vermont focused. We have to be very clear about how they have a cross-border benefit because they can't just benefit the state of Vermont. But our producers or processors across the region can apply for grants. And like I said a moment ago, cow, goat, and sheep producers and processors are all eligible to apply or receive services or funding. And we've partnered quite extensively with the state agencies across the region, state extension, had a number of meetings. Other states are developing advisory committees to help us develop projects that are regional in nature and supporting the sector at large, dairy sector stakeholders, and then viability and business assistance organizations. Our investment in project strategy is really based on four areas that combine in ways that we think support the regional innovation and resiliency for the dairy sector. And none of these will be a surprise, I don't think, but the way that we're hoping that projects address them as part of a system and part of a holistic way of looking at the dairy sector, I think is a little bit different than some of the other ways that we've looked at things in the past. So we look at environmental resource management. Are farms using their farmland to its highest potential? Are we taking into consideration water, the kinds of fertilizers that we use? Are we getting the most production per acre that we possibly can? The animals. Are the animals healthy? Are they long-lived? Is it the right species for the farm? Is it the right breed of cow for the goals of the farm and the process that they're selling to, so that they can recoup the highest payment and dollar amount for their milk? The people. Are they feeling like they can get professional development? Are they well compensated? Are they safe? And then business management skills. So thinking about long-term viability and the ability for a business to be forward-looking when it's making business decisions. And that could be maybe about adding processing, or just in the way that they run their operation as a farmer, understanding that there's opportunities and alterations that they can always make to run their business a little bit better.
And on this particular slide, environmental resources, I'm wondering, would EGO, if we were doing something in regards to ecosystems and how to move forward with better soil health and that, could that program apply for a grant under the stipulations that you have to operate in under?
That's a great question. And we're trying to tease out that nuance with USDA. One of the ways that we are looking at specifically funding ecosystem services type projects is with an eye to how the milk coming from those farms that meet certain management criteria could better market and sell their milk to consumers who are looking for that kind of product. And so there are connections, and we're trying to identify the real points of leverage that this grant program would have versus all of the other efforts and conversations that are happening right now to support ecosystem services work.
And what about, does that, any program that you give a grant to, it has to be in a way so it can happen in other states in the Northeast, or do they have to be working on very similar ecosystem changes for that purpose?
If we run a program just in Vermont, we can do that if it's considered a pilot. And one of the projects we have right now is in its pilot phase, and we're expanding it regionally. We do have to ensure that any research or conversations that we're having that we would capture in a report, for example, would be broadly available to the other states, or that other states could come and learn from us, or we could host events that are open to other states to participate.
Well, why I asked that question is earlier we heard from Ryan Patch, and has a very good program or plans set up to move forward with, but it needs some financing to keep it moving in the right direction. And so I was just wondering if that department could write a grant to your department to see if they could get some coverage on some of that cost. I don't know if you guys within the agency have had that discussion or not, but I was wondering, and I'm sure the committee members are wondering the same thing.
Mm-hmm. We have had those conversations, and there are specific ways that the Innovation Center could help fund it. We would have to discuss it more about what that particularly would look like, knowing that it has to be a regional opportunity, and the work that the Water Quality Division is really focused on Vermont. And so just really understanding the details is where we're headed next.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. So another way to look at how we're using the funds is through these areas of investment. So we've got the large farm sector, we've got the processing sector, and they're connected in numerous ways, but there's a lot of research and development that connects the two that we're looking at. And so what the farming sector does drives a lot of what the processing sector can do. And the consumers of the processing sector are producing product for, marketing to, then impacts a lot of what happens on the farm. And so these things are very much connected, even if they operate independently at times. One of the things that we keep in mind very closely and that influences all of our decisions about funding are these umbrella activities of marketing, consumer demand, and distribution. So just keeping in mind that whatever products we make, they may be the best products in the entire world. And some of our products have been recognized on that national and international stage. If we don't market them well, and if we don't distribute them well, then they're not going to reach the consumers. And if we're not making the things that consumers want, then it's not going to serve our farm industry. So just keeping in mind how those three things work together and then influence the projects that we're funding.
On that particular issue, Laura, development, we had Agrimark people, well, both DFA and Agrimark people in last week or a little bit earlier. And they said exporting was a very important part of their overall generation of revenues. And but when we asked about what are you exporting, thinking of Agrimark or Cabot, of course, first thing you think of is the cheese that they make. And it seems that they're exporting is a lot of powdered milk products and not so much in cheese. And I don't know if they've been in contact with you or any of their people, but if they had a way to export some of that cheese, I'm sure that if our friends in foreign countries got used to that, there would be a big market there for even the exporting of cheese instead of just the powder.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And that's why on the next slide that you'll see, which is on processor focused objectives, we are funding businesses to go up to Canada to develop that export relationship, because we see that as a real opportunity and it's close. So it's not necessarily the considerations about putting cheese on a plane to Australia, for example, and the cost that those involve, or breaking into a really well-established market like England. And so we are looking very closely at how we support export of high value products. So these next three slides, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm just talking to myself.
These next three slides have a lot of information on them. So if I'm covering them too fast or we need to go back, just let me
No.
know. I'm happy to go over them. But these are all of the objectives that we're funding in these first 2 rounds of funds, and there's about 18 of them. So it's quite a bit of information. So these first ones are all focused on farms and farmers. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see education and technical assistance. So we are funding 2 FTEs worth of dairy farm specialists at UVM Extension. And we will continue to fund those through the life of the program as long as we have money available. And this is one of the opportunities where you can say, well, UVM Extension is only Vermont based, which is absolutely true. And the dairy farms that will be benefiting from these direct services are all Vermont farms. But UVM Extension has very well established relationships with Extension across the region. And so they'll be presenting, sharing information, attending conferences along with their colleagues from other states. And so making sure that they're maintaining their knowledge level and sharing best practices across the region is something that we've identified. So these dairy farm specialists will be available for one-on-one consultation with any farm who completes the intake form, which is available both online or via a phone call to the extension office. And they'll be connected with a specialist that has the expertise in their area. So it could be any issue ranging from cattle health to feed spoiling faster than the farmer thinks it should, to agronomy practices, to succession planning, or possibly thinking about doing some value-added production. So this is a real opportunity to provide some additional assistance for the farm sector. Then we are funding a farm worker safety program through Agrimark, and this is in partnership with UVM and Cornell to offer both English and Spanish language farm worker safety education that is driven by the needs of the farm workers themselves. We'll be offering a learning journey to Missouri to visit some of the grazing dairies out there that are run by New Zealand based operations, to really have an immersive experience about what that means to run a New Zealand style operation, the intensive rotational grazing, management of forages, and production of milk that's high in components. And then we'll,
are those one of the, didn't we have one of those farmers up at Jade at that conference?
At the Dairy Summit.
Yeah.
Yeah, he runs one of the larger farms there, and we may be visiting his farm, but there's a whole group of farms that's run by New Zealanders in Missouri, and they primarily ship to DFA. So we'll be working with DFA to identify the farms that would be best to visit.
Yep.
And then we'll be offering technical assistance to farmers via cooperatives. So we're going to offer an opportunity for co-ops to apply for technical assistance that will benefit their membership at large. So like the Agrimark project on farm worker safety will allow other regional co-ops to identify projects that are meaningful to them. Then on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the funding opportunities for farmers. We've got transition to grazing technical assistance contracts. We've got a pilot cohort underway with UVM Extension. And this is one of my favorite projects to talk about as an example of what this grant can do. So we put out a RFP for somebody to offer services, technical assistance to a cohort group of farmers that are in the early stages of thinking about grazing on their dairy farm. UVM Extension was awarded the contract, and they're working with 5 conventional dairy farms in the Rutland, South Addison area, all of whom are very early stage grazers. And what this opportunity does is it creates a community of knowledge and practice where the farmers can learn from each other. They can visit each other's farms, they can meet with each other. They also get one-on-one technical assistance. They get tools to become better grazers for measuring grass and understanding forage production. They get subscriptions to magazines and other resources and visits from professionals. And then at the end of the 18 to 24 months of technical assistance, they're eligible for grant funds to help them implement the final stages of what they need to do to become a successful grazing operation. And we're not asking people to graze 365 days a year. You know, I look outside, there's 30 inches of snow on the ground in Tunbridge. So we understand that you can't graze all the time. But if you can graze your cows really well 5 months out of the year and it costs you zero to do that, then you're going to be making more money on your farm. And consumers, not only do they like to see cows on grass, but it's a marketing opportunity for the cooperative that these farms ship to say that their farms are grazing their cows, feeding them high quality forages, and that it's better for cow health. And so there's opportunities and benefits on both sides here. And then the other funding opportunity that we just launched is agritourism development grants for dairy businesses. And these will be grants to support, it has to be multiple businesses. So it could be a farm and a creamery applying to develop maybe understanding how ice cream is made. It could be the farm that makes the milk. Then they go to the creamery, they see how ice cream is made, and then they get to buy the product. Or it could be multiple cheese producers creating a cheese trail. So a number of opportunities there that we can fund.
So Corey, just a second, Lori. Corey, your constituent up in Berkshire, I believe, I mean, this might be something that would interest her because she was talking about butter or yogurt or something besides just the milk. So thanks, Laura. Sorry to interrupt you.
This next slide is the processor focus objective. So the same thing on the left, educational and technical assistance. We have a virtual training series right now with UVM Extension for value-added producers of any dairy product. It could be yogurt, cheese, butter, milk, looking at both food safety and employee safety in the age of COVID. So how to plan to keep your employees safe in the processing facility, how to plan for employee absences, what happens if there's an outbreak, what happens with your facility. So that is an exciting series that will be offered for free to anybody in the region and essentially nationally can watch this. Then we'll be doing some really exciting work with Heather Darby's team on specialty cheese sensory preferences and microbial research. This is a partnership with UVM and Tufts to really understand how consumers perceive different attributes of specialty cheeses and how we can better enhance those properties by both the processing and the farm production practices. And on the funding side, we're providing grants for marketing and branding professional services so that businesses can ensure that their brand look and feel appeals to their consumer base, that their marketing is up to par. They can sell online if that's the market channel they want to explore, and really enhancing their own particular brand. And also food safety certification grants for these value-added processors to be able to meet audit requirements or enhance their food safety. And finally, we've got the research and development objectives. So on the left-hand side, we've got supply chain alternatives. So looking at the ways that a farm to a processor, thinking about some of the European models where there's groups of farms that all produce their milk in the same way. For example, maybe they don't use fermented feed or they don't feed any grain, and all of that milk is going into the production of one or a few limited styles of cheese. And that creates a higher dollar product and also can create an opportunity for a farmer to earn more money for their milk. And then distribution development. With the Vermont Cheese Council, we supported them to do some major shifts as the response to the pandemic market changes. So a lot of the online marketing, they did an activity called The Hunt that got consumers out and about in COVID safe ways to interact with and buy products from cheese and dairy producers in the state. We're doing quite a bit of research as well. Distribution network capacity study, looking at how we get product from New England to the Eastern Seaboard markets and understanding if we need to look at the skills of producers, if they are distribution ready. We'll be doing a brand reception study. And both of these first two came out of the dairy market assessment that we presented to you last year about the same time that the contractor Karen Karp and Partners did. And so it's a nice way to show the continuity of the effort here. The brand reception study will really focus on how consumers receive brands. So when you go, Senator Starr, I've heard you talk a lot about ice cream over the past couple of weeks. So if you think about the ways that Ben and Jerry's markets versus Haagen-Dazs versus some other, maybe like Hood ice cream, all of the cartons look very different. They're telling you a different story and they're attracting consumers in different ways. So understanding that so that brands know how best to attract the kinds and types of consumers that they're marketing to. And then 2 projects really focused on the dairy goat sector. One is on consumer market research for areas of demand where there's gaps that exist in the goat and sheep sector in products, and where consumers see where there's more demand coming from consumers, the kinds of products that they're interested in. And then looking at the dairy goat sector development needs, and this is in partnership with Vermont Creamery, to really understand beyond the needs that they have for their farms, what else exists out there? Is there additional need for goat milk beyond the farms that Vermont Creameries wants? And then for those farms that either want to start milking goats or transition from cows to goats, what areas of support do we have in place? What areas do we need to develop? So it could be in financing, lending, understanding pro formas for business success. Are there enough veterinarians in place? Do we have enough people on the feed side of things? So just understanding the landscape of the dairy goat sector so that we can support it as it moves forward in development. And then as a final slide, these are the funding opportunities that we have coming up for the first half of this year. So for grants, we've got the multi-business agritourism. It opens next week. The marketing and branding professional services is in April, and food safety in July. And then we've got 2 contract RFPs open now, and the transition to grazing opening later this month. So we're putting out a lot of projects and a lot of money in the first part of this year, and really excited to continue to support the dairy sector in different ways.
Yeah, and how are things going in general, or are you folks that have to manage and promote all this? Is that being well received, and is it working? Do you think it's really working well? And what kind of feedback are you getting from the participants within the grant or within the program?
Mm-hmm. I think people are really excited and interested in seeing the ways that we can support the dairy sector in a way that's really forward-looking. So thinking about value-added production, thinking about higher value on-farm production. So, and when I say higher value on-farm production, I mean thinking about the ways that farms can produce not necessarily more milk, but can produce milk better and increase the value of it. So whether that's increasing components or decreasing their cost of production, then those are all the kinds of things that are going to support the dairy sector long term. And we've had nothing but excitement and enthusiasm when we reach out to people about this opportunity.
Yeah, good. Chris?
Or I'm glad to see you working to promote grazing. Have you heard from others in the agency as we have around the new shelter law that just went into effect in July, and it's having proving some complications for grazers? Have you heard that? Because I fear it's one of those things that we'll have to tweak because our right hand, left hand kind of dynamic, we haven't exactly nailed it. And I'm just curious if that's come up for you.
That is a conversation that I'm aware of, but haven't been directly engaged in. And I do understand from the grazing community that there is there's some apprehension about what it may do to their operations where the cows are outside 24 hours a day.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think Anthony had a question.
Yeah, it's not a question, really, just a comment, but I really appreciate the fact that you're looking at a lot of different models and looking at the components of milk and those kinds of factors. I think that's really important, and also bringing into play things that are going, that sounds like you're looking at like models from Europe and Australia and the rest of the world, which I think it's important that for farmers in the United States start getting with what's going on in the rest of the world, quite honestly. I think that it's just, I'm really glad to hear that you're taking that kind of an approach to really look at the broader picture of how we can improve the dairy in the long term.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Laura, I'll add my appreciation. I think you said you're going to work with Heather. I'm not sure how you put it, but why people like cheese the way they like it, like the sensory sort of elements to why someone might pick a particular, thing of cheese. Pretty interesting.
It is really interesting work, and first of its kind, really, to link back the end product of a mold ripened cheese, if you will, to the on-farm production practices and how we can better meet consumers' expectations of a good product by following what happens to the milk through the entire supply chain. So I think it's going to lead to some really strong results and continue to position Vermont as the national leader in specialty cheese production.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your efforts.
Thanks.
No, we were very fortunate right from the beginning to even get this awarded to Vermont, I think. And it was, I'm sure it was because of the quality of the application and the support that the agency had from a lot of different groups to, put this all together. Have you received any negative feedback that we should be doing this instead of that, or that instead of this? We get a little of that, in the legislature. Well, you're spending your time working on this, and you should be doing that. So I was just wondering how that's all going.
When we first applied, our initial application was more focused on the value added side of the dairy supply chain equation. And we did receive quite a bit of feedback from farmers saying, well, where do I fit in this? I'm a conventional producer. I just want to be a good farmer producing a quality product and making money doing it. And I want my farm to be in a position to have a next generation come on. So what projects are you doing to support me? So I think we were able to address that in the second round by adding on the UVM extension specialists, the farm worker safety, and the other projects that are really meant to be focused on the farm side of efforts. And in some ways it's non-denominational when it comes to production, that any farm can benefit from this help of an on-farm specialist, for example. Any farm can make it safer for their farm workers to be on farm and helping to produce the milk. And so we were able to respond in that way. I think as you all know, the dairy sector has 1,000 different faces to it, and you can always focus attention in multiple ways, and it's going to be at the loss or the benefit of other parts of the sector. And so whatever you do, I think if we had $100 million, we might be able to satisfy every part of the dairy supply chain in the dairy sector. But it certainly was nice to be able to offer more opportunities with the additional funding. And we'll continue to think broadly as we get additional rounds of funding in.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions from committee members? We also have a guest on, I believe, on the line, Jackie Folsom. And I don't know if Jackie...
She has left, Senator. She has
pardon
left. She has already left.
Oh, she's already gone. Yeah. I didn't know if she had a question but enough interest to punch in. So, but she's already left. Is there anything, Laura, that you need or that we could do to make this all work any better, in the future, or are you in pretty good shape? With this COVID stuff, it's been a rough, almost a rough year for us, and I'm sure for you folks to communicate. But I usually ask that question because sometimes there's something that we could do to help push something along.
Thank you, Senator. I think there's always opportunity to leverage funds. So the Working Lands Program, for example, is a great partner opportunity where we've been able to use that application process to already fund a couple of businesses in their marketing shifts as a result of the pandemic. So thinking about the structures and systems that are in place and how the Dairy Business Innovation Center can tap into those. I also just really want to remind you that Vermont is respected around the nation and around the world for our dairy production, and we do a lot of things really, really well. And that is a particular thing that we should all be proud of, that we can always do better, we can always improve the system, but we have amazing cheesemakers, we've got great dairy farmers, they produce high quality, high component milk, and we are really using this opportunity to think about the entire system and how do we improve it and make it more resilient for the decades ahead, thinking about climate change and market shocks. And I guess I just would close in saying that this opportunity is an incredible funding source and diverse way that we can look at dairy and support it moving forward, and appreciate all of your time and attention for the dairy conversations you've had so far this year.
Yeah. Well, we certainly want to thank you and the agency, for all their hard work, because earlier this year when we were doing the COVID funding, your people at the agency worked countless hours and, day in and day out to get as many farms applications in and proper and approved. And so, it makes a big difference when we're all working together and pulling together and, like you just mentioned, Working Lands, the governor's put a pretty good shot in to enhance that in his budget, which a lot of times we've had to do in the legislature, but, as a committee or with the House, and no, it's good. I think, when we have a meeting with farmers, even with low milk prices, most of them are upbeat and looking forward to better days. But no, we're very fortunate. I think that, we're small enough so we all know each other to some degree and work well together. So thanks a lot for your time this morning. And if and when you're moving forward, if there's something that you need from us, you're always welcome to give us a call.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So, yeah, and so we'll see you later, and thank you. And committee, we'll see you at 1 o'clock, I guess, back on Zoom on the Senate floor.